Greetings. Today I'd like to take a quick first look at the Magewell ProConvert Audio DX. This is a device that converts between a number of different audio formats, including Dante, balanced and unbalanced analog audio, NDI, SRT, RTMP, etc. It's kind of a jack of all trades, Swiss Army knife. It was announced, a year-ish ago? I think it's been shipping now for somewhere in the 6 to 8 months, and haven't really seen much on it on YouTube other than like the trade show, hey, here's our new product type things. So I figured it'd be useful to sort of go over it more in depth in case people are interested in it like I was. I will just make a comment real quick. Don't worry about my neck. I had surgery recently to remove a bad disc. Surgery went well, but it's going to take a little while for the incision to heal. So I figured we'll do a quick unboxing, see what you get, and then we'll hook it up to the computer and see how it's configured. And we can also do a few different latency tests, and can also see how it compares to one of the other Swiss Army knives of Dante, the Neutrik NA2 IO D Pro, which sadly this has been discontinued. This doesn't do all of the formats like the Magewell does, but it is still a very useful box on stage. So let's get into the box. Here we have the box. It is pretty nondescript other than having a label saying it's the Audio DX. I suspect they use these boxes for basically all their products. There's no cellophane or anything on it, and it's just a flip open cardboard box. And so let's see what all we have in here. So first off, we have a pair of cables. These are the balanced to XLRs that uses a tip ring sleeve connector, sometimes called a Pentacon, at least in the headphone world. And so you've got stereo pair in, stereo pair out, and these will connect to the box because it doesn't have, it's too small to have the XLRs on it directly. We get a manual, or at least a quick start guide. We get a little bracket for side mounting. We get a USB-A to USB-B cable. It is nice that they used USB-B. It's a much more secure connection, especially when you're dealing with a device like this. We get a power brick, and the power brick, unfortunately, I kind of wish, and it's also got adapters to the various countries. The power brick is going to be probably e-waste for most people because you're going to power this either via power over Ethernet or you're going to power it via USB connected to your computer. You have a little sticker. This is the default IP address for the device when you are connecting to it over USB. And then we have this padded case with the device itself. And so here's the device. So unbalanced in and out. This is just your standard 3.5 millimeter in and out. It's a little status LED there. Here are those tip ring sleeve connectors for these XLR adapters. Here is screw 1/4 20, so mounting. On this side, we have a little rotary switch, which from the manual there doesn't seem to do much other than it changes a board ID that is available. I think that's maybe more for automation where your API scripts can query which device they're talking to by ID. And then on the last side, we've got the USB-B port for connecting to the computer, or you could also power it direct from the brick if you don't need the computer. And then here we have Ethernet with PoE capability. So that's what's in the box. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to get this hooked up to Ethernet and we can start configuring it. I am going to get these other cables out of the bags, or the other pieces out of the bags. So again, you can use this as a standoff. We now have moved the thread mounting position to the bottom of the device so it can sit flat if you want. And then we'll get these cables out. So these appear to be, I don't know, maybe about 6 inches in length. It's interesting that one of them has, or I guess they both do. So if you want to sort of keep them closer together, you can slide that up or pull it back, depending on whatever your particular desires are. All right. So let's get this hooked up to the computer and start fiddling with it. Okay. So I have the USB cable connected to my iMac Pro. It is not a very long cable, it's maybe 3 feet-ish or so. Plug this in and blue light comes on showing it's coming up. And so if we go here, 192.168.6.1, it has connected. The default login is admin, and I am not going to change that right now. By default, we see sort of the overall status of the device. It has presented itself as a USB composite device to the computer. So you have USB network interface, which is how we're able to get to this config page. And then the other thing it has done, if we open Audio MIDI setup, is it is showing up as a USB audio class device. And so we will do some tests with that. Additionally, if I plug in these cables, we can see that now the balanced in and out have lit up. So it doesn't actually care whether there's actually a signal device connected or not. It's just, is there a cable plugged in, and it thinks that it's connected or not. And then the other thing I will do here is plug in the Ethernet so that we can see it in Dante. And so now we can see that it popped up with an IP address on my Dante network. And over here, we can see Pro Convert Audio DX. It has 8 in and out, and then also the 8 here. We go to device info. One of the things I'm curious about, so this device is one of the first devices I'm aware of, and that I own for that matter, which is using Dante's embedded ARM implementation. So this is not based on Ultimo, Broadway, etc. chips from Audinate. Instead, it is using their embedded ARM implementation. And so we can see that here. If we go to latency, device config. So latency, unfortunately, because it's in this embedded thing, you don't get really fast Dante latency options. It defaulted to 4, and it looks like the lowest you can do is 2. Yes. PCM options, sampling rate, it can do 48K or 96. Network config, looks like they don't allow you to change any of this. So you have to use DHCP or link local auto negotiate addresses. There is no option to specify an IP manually. So status, transmit, receive. So if we connect this, well, we'll give that a moment. So it's a little unfortunate that 2 milliseconds is the lowest latency that one can configure. If you look up here, I run most of my stuff at 500 milliseconds, or microseconds rather. Some of the stuff that's in my wireless rack, I run at 250. And then, default stuff is 1 millisecond, except for now we've got a 2 millisecond showing up here. So in the config, global settings, the sample rate comes from Dante. Mic bias is it going to supply bias power for mics? So if you were using, a 3.5 millimeter video shotgun type mic or whatever, it could power that. UAC channels is how many audio channels does it present to the computer. You can set 2 or 4, defaults to 4. IGMP is auto, which you probably want. Test pattern is you can have it send sine wave. Input sensitivity, so you can choose what kind of device you're using. Is it professional? Is it is it consumer, or is it pro audio levels for both input and output? Dante. So you can see the stats on the clock and whatnot, and not a whole lot more on here. Stream. So here you can add your transmit and receive streams. So for example, NDI, SRT, either caller or listener, and RTSP. And so like with NDI, you can define what the name of it is. It's full NDI or NDI-HX. Reference level, the transport mode, so even RUDP, so it's doing NDI5. Discovery server, etc. Does not appear to have a back. I guess we'll just have to do that. For SRT, you got all the parameters you would expect for SRT. You can choose what kind of bit rate you want for it, etc. You can also select encryption and give it the passphrase. System device, this is what it'll show up as. Time zone, I am in US Central. So here, apply. Guess you have to reboot it. It's sort of annoying just to change the time zone. All right, admin. And the time, so because hopefully that doesn't have to reboot. And now you can see that it updated. Network. So maybe here. Yeah, so here, so they don't let you set the IP through Dante controller like you normally would, but you can at least set a static through their own menu. Cloud, Magewell has their cloud, so you can remotely configure these things through that. Firmware. Now, I believe there is an update because there have been several updates. ProConvert, open. Since the device was released, there have been several updates already. So double check and update. And we will see how long this takes. And ready for it to reboot. Reboot. All right, so we're back. It has not yet shown back up in Dante controller. So we have some new options now that we've updated the firmware. So we can see this auto reboot section is new. The API token section is new. It has remembered our NTP settings and time zone. Network. This is showing up. So why is it not showing up in Dante controller? What about in discovery? It is not showing up in operation failed trying to click on the Dante tab. Well, let's do a full power cycle. And now it's showing back up again. So if you do a firmware update, it's probably a good idea to make sure you do a full reboot and not just a full power cycle and not just a reboot. So the next thing, and probably one of the most interesting parts of this device, is the matrix, where you can route basically anything to anything. And so here, I guess it'll be interesting to see if so in terms of, so you could do unbalanced in to unbalanced out or balanced USB, Dante, etc., right? So by default, nothing is mapped. And what I thought we would do is Well, the other thing too is the latency reset to 4 milliseconds. If we say yes, what happens? Well, you can't even do a remote reboot through Dante controller, which is kind of interesting. Again, that's got to be a function of this Dante embedded platform, and that version has updated now with the change to it. And actually now we have the AES67 config. Network config still can't change it from within Dante controller. Also flow information. So we get total of 4 flows in and out. So you could do one for each channel. I was hoping maybe it would do a little more flows, but it's better than a Ultimo-based device, but obviously not the same thing as the more advanced Dante chips. Devices. You can't even send it an identified device. You can still create a multicast flow on it. Anyway, what I wanted to do was some latency testing on this device. So I have RTL utility here, and default audio on this Mac is Caster app. This is a software mixer device. And if we say measure, we can see that Caster is pretty slow, right? 2,663 samples, and that's at 512 samples. If we try to do 16 sample rate, it fails. 32, it fails. 64, still failed. 96, and 96 is the lowest sample rate that successfully works with this software-based mixer. So now the next thing we can try is we can select the Pro Convert, and you can see that it has identified itself as front left, front right, center, and low frequency event effect. And if we say measure right now, I expect it to fail because we haven't mapped anything. If we come over here and we say map left to left, and then measure, that still didn't work. So what if we try 128? Nope. 160. Nope. 192. Nope. Nope. Are we maybe, just to make sure that it's not actually using one of these other channels? Still, what if we go all the way up to 512? No. So mapping USB as trying to loop it back on itself does not seem to be working. That's not what I was expecting. So what if we say we're going to output to balanced from the left, and then for USB audio, we will also input from the left, and then So we want the one that says channel 2. So this one here is channel 1. And then over here, channel 1. So now we are looping through. And what happens if we say measure? Well, that's a different error. And if we look, there's actually a little level meters. And so on the balanced ins, it sees a little bit of signal. On the USB ins, it doesn't. But if we say measure, we see the USB left spike up. We see the balance left spike up. But RTL Lab utility doesn't like it. And what if for kicks we try really quick? So similar thing, and we can see the level meters spike up and come back down. So not really sure what's going on there. What if we again try instead of... So this is another thing you can also do, is you can actually have it mix the inputs going to an output, which is kind of nice. It's basic mixer. And also we got level meters here. If we say measure, we can see that spike up, but it does not like the signal. So if we turn this off and we say USB left, measure, cannot detect the signal, and that should just be looping. And if we look, we can see we've got the meter spike up on the left, and we see the meter spike up on the out to the USB audio as well. So not sure why that's not working. If we change this to our Digiface Dante, and I will do outputs 5. So right now this will fail because it's not set up. But if we open our total mix and turn on loop back and then hit measure, we can see that even with a 16 sample buffer size, that this worked. And it, if I drag this up here, when we say measure, we can see that spike real quick in total mix. And if I turn loop back off and also go to the routing page, and this is the iMac and the iMac, and we map 5 to 5. And then we say measure, we can see we get 102. And so only a few more samples for it to loop back through Dante instead of just looping back in the Digiface Dante itself. And so the next thing let's try doing is we will say that the Mac will pull from channel 1 and over here we will have channel 1 pull from 5. And so We should expect this to not work right now because we haven't set up any of the Dante in the matrix yet. But if we say test, we can see the spike on channel 1. And it's interesting that it thinks it wanted to send the channel or showing output over here as well when we haven't actually mapped it. So if we come here and we say channel 1 to channel 1 and say measure, could not be detected. What if we 256 measure? So that worked. And what is the lowest we can go? What if we say 128? That worked. 64 samples. That worked. 32. So 32 samples is too fast. But at 64 samples, we can loop it, Dante, through the Magewell. And our total delay there is 1,072 samples. So the next thing let's try is we will send Dante out the balanced, and then we will send the balanced back to Dante and see what happens. And that worked. So we know we can loop through the balanced output, which was not working when we were doing it with the USB connection. And how much difference is that in latency? So we went from 1072 to 1140 and about half a millisecond extra latency. So the digital to audio, digital to analog, analog to digital conversion was fairly quick. Now, for comparison's sake, so what I'm going to first do is I'm going to unmap the Pro Convert. And then what I'm going to do is disconnect the Ethernet, and I'm going to hook up the Neutrik. And that flashing green is kind of annoying, isn't it? On the Neutrik, there's nothing for us to configure on the Neutrik itself. What I'm going to do first is connect on the second port. And what this means is we're doing AES digital between the out and the in. And so here is that NA2D Pro. So we will have its output go to come from 5 on the computer, and then 5 on the computer. There. And so now if we do measure, we get 308. And also, if we look at the Neutrik, so status, you can see it's based on the Broadway chipset. Device config, it's set to half a millisecond. We can see latency is coming in good. And if we look here, so looping through this with AES, is a third the latency-ish of looping through the Magewell. And if we do it instead on the analog side, so I've connected to port 1, that makes it run in analog mode. And we say test. Analog was actually even faster than AES by a few samples, right? So 296 versus 308. And if we go back to the Magewell, so again, here's our channel 1 and channel 1. Plug Dante back in. So we will 5 from 1. And then down here, 1 from 5. Measure. And we got a much different result, 881. And it remembered the 2 milliseconds setting. We had a few, let's clear that just to measure. So we're getting some consistent times here, but they're still not the times that we had before. And the latency is definitely a bit all over the place. If we change this to, say, 4, yes, which is what the default is, measure, we're getting, again, some variability. And I should say I've done a bunch of RTL tests with like the Neutrik and whatnot, and they are consistent. They don't vary. So the software implementation of Dante in ARM on the Magewell definitely seems to have some oddities to it. And then let's see, can we go back and try this again? Measure, didn't like it, 128. Didn't like it. Let's double check what our matrix is. So it should not actually work because we don't actually have it patched. Measure, couldn't detect it. And again, 512, couldn't detect it. So it does not really like going looping on the USB. Turn that off. We will send left balance out. And we can turn the, well, actually, so if we do this, because we need this. And so now we get this return level difference thing. What if we take the signal back on Dante? That works. However, huge latency. And it is pretty consistently huge latency. But what we're doing here is we are sending from the USB left out to the balanced left. And the balanced left, we're sending to both Dante and USB. See if we turn that off, does that change the latency at all? No, it does not. All right, so I think that's probably good for now. So that was a quick first look at the Magewell Pro Convert Audio DX, a little conversion box to go in and out from various audio formats. What have we learned? The latency is not spectacular. So if you need this for some kind of live sound thing, might not be the best choice. You'd be better off with, say, the Neutrik. However, if you are doing it, what this thing is kind of really meant for, and to say taking in a Dante feed or an analog feed and sending it SRT to a remote production facility or maybe an OB truck or whatever, where latency is not your concern, probably works just fine. We also learned that you cannot use it as a audio loopback device over USB, but it does work looping back via Dante. So if you have any other questions, please let me know in the comments down below, and I will try to get back to you as soon as I can. Thanks. Cheers.